This is Maureen Brunstall. I'm the author of the Bloomington-Normal Circus Legacy book.
This is Marcus Alwan, director of the Gamma Phi Circus at Illinois State University.
This is Wayne Wright, retired Wayne Zucchini, human cannonball, and I'm listening to the Route 66 podcast.
Route 66, Route 66, right along with the Route 66 podcast. For talks with people living and working along the Mother Road, the main street of America, from Chicago to LA, bore a heavy, heavy load. Route 66, Route 66, sometimes historical paths aren't discovered until they're lost. Right along with the Route 66 podcast.
Hello and welcome aboard the Route 66 podcast for talks with people living and working along the Mother Road. I'm your host, Anthony Arno, and I'd like to thank you for joining us here today on our journey. On today's show, we talk about the rich history of circus life along Route 66, and I have three guests talking about the early days of aerial circus performances in the Bloomington-Normal area of Illinois, including the human cannonball, Wayne Wright, who's been shot out of a cannon while performing with the famous Zucchini Brothers well over 1,100 times. Probably one of the best kept secrets along the road is the collection of artifacts that are available for viewing under normal conditions that feature the history of circus life in America. The collection is second to the Ringling Circus Museum that they have at their world headquarters in Florida. Well, since our last episode, I'm back from my annual Route 66 trip, and let me tell you, what a trip it was. Between meeting up with past friends and guests related to the podcast and newly made acquaintances that I made along the trip, it was a busy trek along the eastern half of the Mother Road. I started out in Chicago and headed to Joliet, Illinois, where I toured the Joliet prison and walked around downtown to see the upcoming Rock and Roll Museum and the Rialto Square. In Dwight, it was a stop at the Windmill and the Soulsby Service Station. Pontiac, the Route 66 Welcome Center and Statue of Lincoln. The Cozy Dog Diner. Chain of Rocks Bridge in St. Louis. In Rolla, Missouri State University. The Uranus Gift Shop. Devil's Elbow. Dead Man's Curve. The Munger Moss Motel, the Gillows Theater. I spent an entire afternoon with Blaine Davis at the Blue Whale. In Chelsea, the 1926 Bridge, a Sears home, and the Route 66 Tunnel. Foyle, the Andy Payne statue, and the Totem Park, the Will Rogers Memorial, and other statues of Will Rogers. In Tulsa, the Desert Motel, the Mother Road Market, Route 66 Rising, the 11th Street Bridge, Cyrus Avery Apartments, attending the Route 66 Oklahoma meeting in Bristow, Oklahoma, which was led by Reese Martin and a group of dedicated people to preserving and promoting Route 66, in Stroud, the Rock Cafe, and searching out an obelisk off Route 66, Pop Hicks, the Threet Filling Station, the Round Barn, the Route 66 Museum in Clinton, Oklahoma, Valentine Diners, in Shamrock, the gas station, where once again I met Vern, who's only there on Mondays. Devil's Rope Museum, Groom, the Leaning Water Tower, and the Cross. In Amarillo, I spent an afternoon with Bob Lyle at his art studio, right in the heart of downtown Amarillo. The Blue Swallow Motel, where both Kevin and Nancy wrapped up their final days there before handing over the keys to the new owner. Then it was time to turn around in Tucumcari, New Mexico, and head back to Chicago, stopping in Glen Rio, the Midpoint Cafe, where I finally met Brenda, and we recorded an episode soon to be released right here on the podcast, the Cadillac Ranch, the Big Texan, Fort Reno, where I once again toured the historic cemetery, And if you remember that episode with Caroline Barker, she suggested that the next time I was in Fort Reno, I try an onion burger. Well, I did, and I asked around for Caroline, and I was sad to learn that she had passed. But I had the memory of our wonderful talk on my mind as I just sat there and people watched while enjoying my onion burger. And here's a new one for me, the Sand Hills Curiosity Shop in Eric, Oklahoma. Yep, that was a first for me. Once again back in Tulsa, at the Campbell Hotel and the Route 66 room. Mary Beth at Buckeye Curios, the Route 66 Market. Nancy, who gave me a tour of the Miami Cemetery, where British soldiers have been laid to rest. A tour of the Miami Theater. Galena, Kansas, Mater. Debbie at the Boots Motel. Bikers on Route 66. It seems every time I'm on the road, I always find at least one person bicycling along Route 66, and I fill them up with water and all the snacks I can give them. Now, about 20 years ago when I was biking Route 66 from Chicago to Oklahoma City, I met Gary at Gay Parita. Gary has since passed, but I met his son-in-law George, and I must have spent 3 hours there that afternoon. The Wilmington Mural, where one of my earliest guests on this podcast was a high schooler who had painted the mural outside of the Two Hounds Antique Shop, which is now under a new name, and of course the Gemini Giant. And I have to tell you, during my almost 3,000-mile trek from Chicago to Tucumcari and back, I was in the middle of interviewing for a middle school position closer to home, and I did it on the road. You see, I had to present a lesson focusing on technology, and while I was at Missouri University, there was a Stonehenge exhibit there. So my lesson was focused on the technology of time, and I spent many hours preparing for it at the Campbell Hotel in the Route 66 room, and then I presented it in the early morning at the Boots Motel, where I was the only one on the property. In fact, Debbie allowed me to stay there, and she had the Wi-Fi turned on for my interview, and it went great. And I'll forever remember having the door open because it was so hot, and the sound of freight trains in the background, which you really just don't hear back home here in New Jersey. Also, I met a remarkable mother-daughter team traveling the road. Special shout out to Grace, who just graduated from college, and traveling Route 66 was on her bucket list, and I met her at the Midpoint Cafe. And I just wish her the best of luck as she begins her career. Another thing I didn't expect during my trip was how busy it would be, nonstop, just trying to keep a tight schedule, but constantly running over with unexpected stops or just meeting fellow travelers like myself. There are many of you out there that I was unable to meet up with, and you know who you are, and it really pains me, honestly, knowing that for reasons beyond my control, we may never meet. But I carry you in my spirit as I record this show, so thank you. Thanks to everyone who entered the Route 66 Scholarship Program. I look forward to sharing the results with you on a future episode. The program will run again this school year, and I encourage anyone in grades K-12 to enter next spring. As an educator, you can imagine my excitement when I see a younger generation interested in learning all about the road that was probably introduced to them through the Cars franchise. Listener feedback. In the last episode, I asked you to call in on SpeakPipe and leave a message about your favorite Route 66 souvenir. We all have one, and here's Phyllis from Texas.
Hi, this is Phyllis Gray in Houston, Texas. My favorite Route 66 t-shirt is my Painted Desert Trading Post shirt. It was beautifully designed by Shelley Graham, who's a highly respected Route 66 writer and also part of the group that is taking care as guardians of this iconic holy grail of Route 66. So that's my favorite. Thank you.
Thanks, Phyllis. And we're going to send you a Route 66 face mask for leaving that message. For me, I think my current favorite souvenir is a t-shirt from the Mother Road Market that I picked up this past summer. But if we're talking about souvenirs from past episodes, I like to collect artifacts from past guests or anything that's related to them. So as I look up on my bookcase, I have from the Keeley Institute episode an actual glass jar with the Keeley logo stamped on it. or from the Route 66 trucking show, I have an official Campbell Express belt buckle. But probably one of the most sentimental is from the Times Beach episode, where I have a Times Beach landfill sticker from way back when Times Beach was in its final phase before being purged. So for this month, I'd like you to either send me an email or leave me a message at Route 66 Podcast on your favorite Route 66 place to eat along the road. There are so many places along the road to fill up your stomach, and for me, I like to visit as many as I can, even if it means just ordering one thing off the menu, just so I don't leave there stuffed and I can stop at the next place down the road. If I share your response with my listeners, I'll be sending you a Route 66 washable face mask. Good luck. And now, here's the trivia question for today's show. On the last episode, I spoke with Route 66 author Jim Hinckley, who is just such a fascinating person. During my talk with Jim, he spoke about growing up in Michigan, where his grandfather had a patent for the coaster brake on the bicycle. When Jim was growing up, there was a picture in his house of his grandfather with what famous pioneer who really made a mark here in America during the 20th century, not only with the automobile, but also directly or indirectly that led to the growth of this highway called Route 66. The answer after today's show. Well, welcome to the Route 66 podcast, Maureen.
Well, thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
And we're here to talk about the Bloomington-Normal Circus Legacy, a book that you had written. The book starts out, no one cares about this stuff. No one cares about circus history. Is that true?
That was our inspiration to write the entire book. Somebody had come into Special Collections, somebody who has a tremendous amount of knowledge, personal knowledge of circus and the role that this community played in its history. And he said, why should I talk to you? Because no one cares about this stuff. And when we heard him say that, we're like, no, that's not right. That's not true. People do care about this stuff. It just seems like they don't know about it.
And how did Bloomington-Normal become the center for circus acts specializing in aerial performances?
Well, that's a piece of the puzzle that we have constructed since the book actually was published in 2013. A couple years ago, we were doing research not related to the book specifically, but related to Jesse Fell, who I like to call the most overlooked man in American history, because he's the guy who was friends with Abraham Lincoln and convinced a young Lincoln, you ought to go into politics, and later you ought to run for president. He's also the guy, Jesse Fell, who founded this university, Illinois State University. So I like to tease my students by saying, where would we be without Jesse Fell? We would not be at Illinois State University because he founded this university, but we might not even be in these United States of America because, of course, he convinced Lincoln to run for president, and he's the guy, Brett Lincoln's the guy who got us through that terrible time in our nation's history. But Jesse Fell had a nephew, I.P. Fell. I.P. Fell opened the first gymnasium in Bloomington. And in that first gymnasium in the 1870s, he installed a relatively new thing for circuses, and that was the trapeze. The trapeze had been around for a while as an exercise apparatus, but never had it been employed in circuses or entertainment until Jules Leotard. We know that name because of leotards. People wear leotards to this day, but Jules Leotard invented trapeze in France earlier, and the trapeze as an entertainment apparatus made the leap from Europe to America, and I.P. Fell installed a trapeze in his brand new gym in the early 1870s in downtown Bloomington. Well, when he did that gym lured boys from around the community to become members, and such was the case with the Green Brothers. The Green Brothers were members of that gymnasium, and the local newspapers of that time were writing reviews of the performances that were held in that gymnasium to kind of drum up more business and an additional clientele. Well, one of the performances were, of course, the Green Brothers, and the local papers said they were every bit as good as professional athletes. So what those boys did was they took off and they joined a circus. And we have no reviews of that first season with the circus, but they came back home in the off season. When those boys came back home, they brought people with them in gymnasiums like the one that fell open, and in the barns that we had throughout town. People would set up riggings and practice the craft and then keep going out and just get better and better. We certainly did a heck of a whole lot to advance the artistry of trapeze.
Maureen, what about the most famous barn from Bloomington-Normal? What can you tell us about that?
Oh, the most famous barn in Bloomington-Normal. From a circus perspective, that was the Ward barn. Eddie and Jenny Ward were a brother and sister act from Bloomington. They started performing in the early 1900s, I think 1903, 1904. And they were a double trapeze performing act. So they weren't flying return, but they had to have two bars, one above the other on two ropes. And they would do tricks between those two parallel bars, if you will, suspended over the seats. But in 1913, when they came home, they didn't have a place to practice, a dedicated space. They had a farm east of town, east of Bloomington we're talking about, and they decided to build a barn with the specific purpose of training trapeze performers. Eddie and Jenny built that barn in 1913, and that barn stood for decades. And I can't imagine what a flying barn looks like. We only have pictures of it. Sadly, the barn was torn down, I believe, in the 1980s.
Now, is the YMCA building still around today?
No. The YMCA was another very important building in Bloomington, downtown Bloomington. And that was actually on the street that was part of Route 66. That YMCA building was built around 1910. It was used from that time period through World War II as a place where rigging was permanently installed, where trapeze performers could come and practice their craft. So there were multiple places in town where performers could practice, and it said that every hour the YMCA was booked for people to practice their act. That's why the Eddie and Jenny Ward had to erect their own barn. They didn't want to be in a queue. They wanted to have their own space dedicated to it. In addition to that, people set up rigging all throughout these communities, these twin cities of Bloomington and Normal.
As I read your book, I could see the Flying Wards as a possible movie, such as they had an act in 1903, and they were earning $15 a week. Tell us what they did to earn a few more bucks. Is that true?
When they were at a fair, I have to back up and tell you that Eddie quit school in third grade to help support his mom and sister. So Eddie dropped out of school and became a butcher boy and a newspaper delivery boy and supported the family that way. And it is said that when a circus came to town, he saw people performing trapeze and he thought he and his sister could do that. So they found their way to a small town south of here, Atlanta, Illinois, and performed at the fair there in 1903. At that fair, they passed the hat after their performance, and they came home with a tremendous amount of money that was so spectacular. Their mother said, "Guess what? You're not going back to being a butcher boy or a newspaper boy. You're now a professional athlete." And that's when they started their professional careers.
Wow. So Atlanta is along Route 66. And in those days, they collected $450. Is that correct?
They did. They collected $450 passing the hat, which is a very good take. Even today, I would imagine.
How much would that be worth today?
Yeah, $450 in today's money would be roughly $10,000, which is a heck of a whole lot.
Now, Jenny died, you said, in a train accident, a circus train accident?
Yeah. Actually, she was on a train up in the Chicago area, Hammond, Indiana, actually. And their train, the Hagenbeck-Wallace Circus train, was parked on a siding, and a troop train, of course, that's during World War I. A troop train, the engineer for a troop train had fallen asleep, and he actually telescoped into the Hagenbeck-Wallace train, which was on a siding, and they killed a lot of people.
And how did Ernie die?
Ernie Lane was a spectacular flyer back in the day. He was part of the Flying Wards, and he was going to be, he was well on his way to being a superstar because he could perform the killer trick, which was the triple somersault. This was 1921, and the Flying Wards were in Chicago practicing their act before they opened, and he had done almost a triple somersault, but he fell into the net around 2.5 revolutions. And he landed funny. And Eddie, who was the catcher, saw him land and said, "You're done. You're done for the night." And reports say that Ernie was trying to say, no, I can go back up. Let me make that trick. And Eddie kept saying, "No, you're done." The end of the story, the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would say, is that Ernie was taken back to the hotel and never woke up the next morning because he'd broken his neck, landing incorrectly in the net. Yeah.
Now let's talk about the collection at the Illinois State University. How large is the collection there?
Oh, the Circus and Allied Arts collection has hundreds of thousands of items in it. It's difficult to do a census count on the number of items because every photograph, every clipping, every album is full of so many items. But we have hundreds of thousands of photos, be they glass plate negatives or positives or Kodachrome slides. We have over 10,000 Kodachrome slides. We have a Ringling archive, which is full of ledgers and cash books. These are the accounts which really show the business side of Circus. And of course, it's difficult for some people to really realize that Circus was an entertainment, of course, but at the end of the day, it was an entertainment that had to make money to keep going. And it's those cash books and ledgers that really tell the story of how much money they made in the early days. Our Ringling archive includes those materials from the late 1880s until roughly the 1920s, after Ringling Brothers purchased Barnum & Bailey in 1907. The Ringling archive also includes letters and correspondence, letters between the Ringling Brothers as they're negotiating deals. Otto Ringling most famously writes this letter in 1907 to his brother saying, "Hey, I've just made it out here to the East Coast, and I think we ought to buy this thing called Barnum & Bailey Circus." The start of Ringling Brothers Barnum & Bailey Circus is nowhere else but in the vault at Illinois State University. Our collection also, of course, contains wonderful props. We think of the Clyde Beatty collection. Clyde Beatty was a very famous animal trainer. We have his whip and his boots and his pith helmet and posters. We have over 10,000 circus posters. That was the major form of advertising back in the day. We have books, over 8,000 books on Circus, which is more than any other place on the planet. It's really a thrill to work there because you're going to learn something new every day. It's hard not to.
And tell us about a recent donation from Herb Eckert. Herb Eckert.
Yeah, he's a gentleman who lives in Sarasota, Florida, and he is a retired librarian, a high school librarian actually, from the Las Vegas, Nevada area. And he retired in Sarasota, Florida with his partner. And together they came to the decision of leaving their Herb's collection to Illinois State University. And it includes over 22,000 publicity photos of acts. And it also is full of poster art, which we've never had before. Their collection also included scrapbooks and contracts of early performers, as well as some wonderful snapshots of performers in the backyard. Oh my gosh, I have to say, over 1,000 pieces of wardrobe came to us from Herb Eckert, and we are thrilled to get that because before their generous donation, we only had flying wardrobe, leotards, the tights that we talked about earlier. We only had those sorts of materials, but now because of Herb Eckert's generosity, we have things like wardrobe for a bear act or ringmasters, I should say. Wonderful, wonderful pieces of wardrobe.
So did he donate over 250,000 pieces? Is that true?
Yes, he did. Over 250,000 items.
Wow.
in his
And what does that look like when he donated it? Did he just drive his car to the back door of the library?
No, I think it was a 22 or 25 foot U-Haul packed to the gills that I picked up in Sarasota and picked up the material that he had in a wonderful storage facility there that was heat and humidity. It was controlled for heat and humidity. And
what caused Herb to donate to ISU instead of Florida, Ringling Brothers, if he's right down there in Florida?
Yeah. Well, I talked with Herb for a number of years, and I'm assuming that the Ringling Museum and Circus World Museum did as well. But I think what really resonated for Herb was that we were an educational institution, and in that way, we serve a little different function. I can't say we serve different function. We have a little different mission, I guess, than my museum counterparts. Museums are fabulous institutions that serve to educate the public that visits them, but Illinois State University is a university, and our mission is to educate the students who are at the university. And I think that's something that really resonated with Herb.
So how can the Route 66 traveler see the collection at Illinois State University? Is it open to the public?
It is open to the public. We do not check IDs at the door. It is warehoused in one of, if not the most secure location on campus, which means that you can't just walk in, but you certainly can come to the door, knock on it, or call in advance and make an appointment. We are not a museum, so we don't have exhibits out all the time.
Before we say goodbye, how can our listeners learn more about the website for the collection at ISU?
Yeah, the website, if they go to ilstu.edu, ilstu.edu, and in that website, if they search for Circus, they're going to be linked to a number of different resources. They're going to find Passion for Circus, which is our Kodachrome slide exhibit. They're going to be linked to transcription sites where they can transcribe historical documents that are often about history of circus. They're going to find through the library, library.ilstu.edu, they're going to find access to the books. So if they were just to type in a search as simple as Circus and limit it to special collections, they'll see those books that I was mentioning earlier.
And we'll have the link to the Bloomington-Normal book, Circus Legacy, and everything else that Maureen's been talking about today at our website, route66podcast.com.
I can't thank you enough for your time today. It's been a heck of a lot of fun talking to you about this stuff.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Well, Marcus, thank you so much for joining me here today on the podcast. And so my listeners probably want to know, how does a biomechanics major get involved in a college circus scene?
That is a common question that I get. My love for circus came as an undergraduate. I was a performer with the Gamma Phi Circus. It was my first real introduction to circus. And then biomechanics, one of my required classes was injury biomechanics. And so I studied injuries and how people get injured, especially repetitive stress injuries and those kinds of things, which we certainly see in the circus. And so it certainly helped me to hopefully make our gym a safer environment and to make sure that we're always keeping an eye on that. And then we also studied the physics behind how people move and how people, believe it or not, fly through the air and those kinds of things. And so it carried over very nicely into what I'm doing now.
So tell us, what is the Gamma Phi Circus?
So the Gamma Phi Circus is the oldest collegiate circus in the nation. We were started in 1929. This would have been this was our 91st year in Normal, Illinois, at Illinois State. And we're an organization that promotes the circus arts, the performing arts. We work with college students entirely. Our entire troupe of we had 115 this year, which is our biggest year that we've ever had, the most students we've ever had. And we bring in, lately we've had more and more students who have circus background, but that's still quite a minority. Most of our students, probably 95% of our students, have zero circus background.
So the ISU Gamma Phi Circus is the oldest collegiate circus in America. How many other colleges out there have a circus troupe on campus?
So there are a lot more colleges that are starting to have aerial arts programs, or there's plenty of schools out there with juggling clubs, unicycle clubs, that kind of thing, and even some circus clubs. However, on the size and scale of what we do, it's pretty much just us and Florida State University at this point.
So what are the different acts? You guys put on a spectacular show for the attendees when we were there. What are the different acts that the students train for in the show?
Well, thank you. We have a wide variety of acts, some that are staples that stay with us year after year. And then in order to keep our show fresh and our audience engaged, we do switch some acts in and out. We are based out of gymnastics, and so a lot of our acts are tumbling, and they're acro sport and those types of acts that stay with us. We have our acrobats, we have our jugglers and our clowns and unicyclists, and then we have our aerialists. Teeterboard and Russian swing are two of our staples and favorites. A lot of fan favorites there.
Tell us about the Russian swing, because I was very impressed.
It's the closest I've ever been to, I think, real flying. It was one of my favorite acts to perform for sure. But it's a big platform on a pendulum that will swing back and forth, and you have 1 to 2 pushers on the back side of the swing and a flyer on the front side. And so we build up the swing, and then the flyer will launch into the air doing different variations of tricks, whether it's big flipping and twisting tricks or even just nice graceful flying tricks. And we do get people about 30 feet in the air is about our peak as far as how high we're throwing people.
So when I saw you guys did something unique on a wheel that they were rolling around. Tell us about that type of performance.
Sure. So German wheel is, or wheel gymnastics is a sport that's competed throughout the world. And so Circus has taken that to be something that we've incorporated as a performance art. And so we're really lucky that we have had some amazing wheel gymnasts come through our program and are currently with our program. We have the U.S. champion from the U.S. Championships 2 competitions ago, and he competed in the World Championships. From ISU, he's currently working at ISU and stayed. And his introduction to German wheel came as a student at ISU. We've had several others who have competed at the national level, but it's a beautiful art form that came out of Germany, obviously, and some German wheelers get a little offended if you call it a hamster wheel, but a lot of people have made that comparison before. But it is 2 wheels that are welded together with rods, and you stand in the middle, and you can do different tricks. You can go over, under, swing around the rungs. It is something amazing to watch, and if you're unfamiliar with the German wheel, I encourage you to go out and just check it out on YouTube or some other platform where you can see videos of it, and it's worthwhile for sure.
Absolutely, and we'll have a link at route66podcast.com. So let me ask you this, Marcus. How many people do you see come through who are Route 66 travelers? Do many of the travelers know about the Gamma Phi Circus? Because I certainly didn't until recently.
Unfortunately, we are a very well kept secret in a lot of ways. I think more and more as time goes on, we are becoming more recognized and more known. Just like I mentioned, we get more and more students every year who are seeking out Illinois State University because they know of the Gamma Phi Circus and they want to participate. We've had people from all over the world and that have come to ISU just to be a part of Gamma Phi. But all in all, we get a lot of our out of the area traffic from Chicagoland, and so mostly they're taking the interstate to get down to us. We do get some that come through Route 66 that know about us, that want to at least come in and say hello or see a practice. But as far as I know, there's not a lot that come through to see our annual show or things like that.
So on the list of all the disciplines there, which act is the easiest to learn and which act is the most difficult to learn?
That's an interesting question for sure. But it really depends on the person. So for me personally, when I came into Circus, balance was something that came very easily to me. Now, those that come from a gymnastics background, a diving background, often take very well to teeterboard or Russian swing, obviously tumbling, and some of those acts.
So, Marcus, where do most of the graduates go once they graduate from ISU? What do they do for a career?
So Illinois State University started as a teacher college. It was Illinois State Normal University, and normal colleges in years ago were teacher colleges. And so that's still a very prevalent major on campus. So many of our students are teacher education majors, just like I was. However, we cover all spectrums from accounting to zoology and everything in between. And then we do have a few that go on to performing professionally out of college. We have several who have made careers out of circus from their time with us.
Who's the biggest success story you can share with us?
So we have several students with Cirque du Soleil right now that are performing in different shows. Our biggest success story would probably be Christian Stoinev. He was a finalist on America's Got Talent. He won Germany's version of that show. I don't know the German name, but essentially Germany's Got Talent. He's won different competitions across the world, but he's performing a full-time contract in Las Vegas, and then he spends about half of his time performing NBA halftime shows, college basketball halftime shows, and has been incredibly successful and certainly well known. It's an amazing act that he comes to us with. He's one that had come to us with a previous circus background. He's the biggest success we've had.
Wow, that's an impressive story. But even more impressive, tell us about your recent trip to New York City.
So we were welcomed by Macy's to bring 16 students. We performed with Billy Porter. He was on the coach float, and we were performing in front of that float. There was a lot of back and forth between Gamma Phi Circus and Macy's as far as what they wanted in their performance, what kinds of acts we were able to take, and those kinds of things. And to my knowledge, we're the second circus to stop on the Star and perform in front of the cameras for, I believe this was the 93rd Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. And that is just such an incredible honor that they wanted us to be a part of that. And the students had just the time of their life. We were able to take our Russian bar act, unicyclists, jugglers. We also had jumping stilts and a few other things that it was such an incredible experience that I know these students will take with them forever.
And I'll have video of their performance at Route66podcast.com. Marcus, where were you when you heard that you got the green light to participate in the New York City Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade?
Well, we had been in conversation with them for over a year, and I had pretty much given all of it over to the artistic director because he had performed and been in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade when he was with Big Apple Circus. And so he actually held that information and kept it a secret from me until our show in April of 2019. I had just given my thank you to the audience for coming. I handed the microphone over to Yvonne, and he made that announcement, which none of us knew. The students backstage didn't know. I had never heard before that point that we had been given the green light, and I certainly was amazed. I'll certainly never forget it. He's a showman for sure, and likes to put on a show when it comes to those kinds of things. And so he definitely got me. I was amazed, surprised, so excited. The students backstage were just overjoyed. It was certainly something I'll never forget.
And how do you prepare these kids for performing in front of 3.5 million people live and another 20 million people watching it on TV? The pressure must have been incredible. What do you tell the students?
The pressure was incredible for sure. We prepared these students as well as we possibly could. We, of course, picked students who did have some experience, who we knew could perform under pressure. We spend our entire year preparing for our April show because in that scenario, we're in front of thousands of people. And over the course of the weekend, about 16 to 17,000 people, which is still pales in the comparison to what happened in New York. So we definitely picked students who we knew had handled pressure well in the past, and then we prepared them when we first invited them that there was going to be countless extra practices. The amount of hours that we're going to have to be put in extra was quite intense. And then we prepared contingencies for every scenario, heavy rain, light rain, heavy wind, all of those kinds of things so that they could do this kind of in their sleep. And they came through with flying colors. It was one of the most incredible things to be a part of. And it's something that these students will take with them forever.
Marcus, under normal conditions, how can a Route 66 traveler see the Gamify Circus? What is the season like that has public performances? You said April. Is there any other time?
So the students will return to campus typically mid to late August, depending on the year. I'm not sure which the dates are for this coming year, and we're, of course, still waiting to hear when we're able to get back on campus. But it's always mid to late August that the students will start back on campus. We're often brought in for lots of different venues. Many of them are private performances for different companies or different towns or things like that. And then April is certainly our other big show. The homecoming parade is always a lot of fun. Sometimes we do halftime shows at the basketball game. There's lots of those different kinds of things. But our main show is always in April. Depends on the weekend based on spring break and Easter and all of those kinds of things. But people are always welcome to just give me a call and pop by the gym during one of our open gyms if the schedules line up. If people are in town, I'm always happy to welcome people into our community in our area.
And what's your take on the current trend of traditional circuses like Ringling Brothers, which is no longer, and the direction that circuses are going? Yeah.
Seeing Ringling close was heartbreaking. Our assistant director our artistic director and assistant coach both performed on Ringling for years. And it was probably my first circus experience. I think, I'm not 100% sure, because I don't quite remember it, and my parents don't seem to quite remember it either. But I do have some vague memories of that, and to have that last show on rails, meaning they traveled by train, was just heartbreaking to see it close. I did hear, and I'm pretty sure it's set that Ringling is coming back. Although I'm sure it's going to be a very different show and different program when that does reopen. But I was very happy to see that was going to be the case. I love the artistic path that Circus seems to be taking, and the avenues that has opened up. There are a lot of circus performers working outside of circuses. They're working halftime shows. They're working at different restaurant or venues or things like that, or even just theme parks and those kinds of things. That's where many of our students have found employment outside of Gamma Phi. And that's wonderful to see, and I love seeing that. I will always have a fond place in my heart for some of those traditional circuses with the ringmaster and just amazing acts coming out that are people that have spent their entire lives honing these skills, and always seem so excited to show us those skills, and I always loved watching those. And there still certainly are many wonderful shows out there still doing this today. But it certainly is, of course, less than historically.
Yeah. Marcus, is there anything else you want to share with our listeners before we say goodbye?
One of the things that I hope people know and understand about our students is that they do this completely for the love of the art of circus. They're not getting scholarship money. They're not getting paid. They're not even getting class credit for what they do. They put in countless hours because they love the family that we've created and what they are doing. And so in my mind, they are the hardest working college students on any campus anywhere in the nation. And I'm just so proud of them.
And it sounds like you have a terrific program there. See, I didn't know that. I thought they were actually taking, or they could take some classes that would count as part of their graduation requirement, but apparently that's not true.
It may come in the future, but in our 91 years, it has not been a regular part of our program.
Now, does the Gamma Phi Circus have a website?
We do. So it is. It used to be a little simpler, but now it's Gamma Phi Circus at illinoisstate.edu.
And we'll have the links on the podcast show notes. Well, Marcus, thank you so much for joining me today on the Route 66 podcast.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right, so my guest today was a presenter at the Miles of Possibility Conference in Illinois, where the theme was the Bloomington-Normal Circus Legacy. Well, after talking about the Gamma Phi Circus, how could you not include Wayne Wright, the human cannonball? Wayne, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fine, thank you.
Thank you for joining us here on the Route 66 podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us.
My pleasure.
Wayne, what is your earliest memory of Route 66?
I probably go back to about 1946 after my dad got out of the Army. And we drove in an old 41 Hudson.
Wow.
Through from Las Vegas area.
And where were you born and raised?
Denver, Colorado.
And then how did you eventually wind up in the Normal Bloomington area?
Well, our show business career started with school assembly shows, then went to county fairs, which were mostly in the Midwest. And we connected with an agent here and were booked almost every week somewhere in Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa. And if we did have a week off, it was too far to get back to Denver. So we bought a mobile home and stayed in Mahomet for 5 years, and then we moved up to Bloomington. So most of the Bloomington Circus history was before I showed up here.
And when you were a little boy, did you know what you wanted to do for a living?
No. I'm 80 now, and I still don't know what I want to do.
Oh, I'm sure my listeners are going to enjoy your story, Wayne. So how did you eventually connect with an interest in gymnastics and trapeze?
I was in a boys' club in Denver from the 40s to when I got out of high school. It was kind of military, but they had a tumbling team that I saw and I just really wanted to get into. And through that, I met a couple of guys that were a little older than I was, but, they were bigger, so I was a top mounter doing tricks with them. And was one of my lifelong friends. We set up flying trapeze in Denver, which led to most of the flying trapeze camps around the country, because one of our buddies was Bob Christians, who went on for the Club Med trapeze installations.
Now, when I met you, I attended your presentation. I didn't even know this, but in the world of tumbling and trapeze, there's two roles or responsibilities or training discipline. Tell us what they are.
Well, usually there's a focus. Catchers are bigger, flyers are smaller. I always caught our catchers, which outweighed me about 40 pounds.
Wow.
And there are some, a lot of the South American acts are pretty equally sized, catcher to flyer. But the flyer has to have certain kinesthetic awareness and skills, to do tricks like triples or doubles or full twists. The catcher is just has to be very dependable. When you fly out to him, you have to know that he's going to be willing to die to catch you.
Yeah.
So,
and they make it look so easy, but how hard is that?
It takes years of practice. And even when it looks easy, it's not.
No, I'm sure. Now, Wayne, what was your connection with the Gamma Phi Circus when you were involved with them?
Oh, when we moved into this area in the early 70s, I set up our trampoline in the yard to practice, but it kind of got cold in the winter. And then I heard about that circus. I went around and introduced myself, and as an offer to, help them develop their skills, they would let us come in and practice. So for about from 73 or 4 to 95, I was just kind of an unofficial coach. Whenever we were in town, we'd work out there and I'd help them, guide them along. And in 95, when I retired from the circus, they offered me one of the directorships. And so I coached there full-time for about 10 years, went back and finished my degree. And here we are.
Wow. And what was that tenure like as the director of the Gamma Phi Circus? Any highlights you can share with us?
Well, just the satisfaction of, helping a lot of young people develop skills, do things they thought they'd never be able to do.
And did any of your students continue in the circus field? And if so, where did they eventually wind up as a professional trapeze artist?
Some did. I kind of just got out of it when I left them in about 05. I know some have gone to Circus Soleil. I think earlier there were a couple that went to Ringling Clown College. A couple had tryouts with acts and worked with acts for a little while. And it takes a lot to develop an act and get started in the business. So one of the ways is to be hired into somebody's act.
And now you were trained as a tumbler. How did you eventually make the transition into the canon?
Well, tumbling is just basic. And from that, it got into trampoline, and from there to trapeze. hand balancing. And I was using those skills on a circus that had the double cannon featured. And I became friends with the two guys doing it. Let them play on our trampoline and practice that. But one of the guys had to go back to his family in Costa Rica. So a week later, they called me and asked me if I wanted to do the cannon.
And what did you say, Wayne?
I got butterflies and my hands started sweating on the phone.
Oh, my gosh.
But I went down to Nashville where the Shrine Circus was going on, and in the nighttime, during the daytime, we'd practice the cannon. So I spent a week learning it. The quickest anybody else had ever learned it was 2 weeks. And prior to that, people would take 6 months to a year to learn it. But they were in a hurry. So it was like, get in, are you ready? Go, bang, get back in, go again.
So tell us the story the very first time you launched out of a cannon. What was that like?
Well, the very first time practice, they pull the cannon right up to the net, and you just literally stand on the barrel and jump into the net. And then they shoot you 10 feet, and then 20 feet, and then 40 feet up into the net, and they back the net up and do that process again, back it up again, do it a few more times. Pretty soon you're back about 80 feet, going 80 feet high, 110 mile an hour. That's always scary.
Yeah.
I always got into it with a couple of good friends, Jim Beam, Jack Daniels. They kind of helped me along. Just kidding.
How popular was the cannonball launch during a typical circus show?
It was always the closing act.
Oh.
The most, even when we had the Powers Act and the Walinda Pyramids and stuff, it was the closing act.
And how many times would you say you've been fired out of a cannon?
A little over 1,200.
Wow. And did you ever have any serious injuries or get beat up?
I got beat up a few times, tore up a knee that required surgery, reversed the curve in my neck, which required a few weeks off, broke my nose, and knocked a tooth out.
So 1,200 times being fired out of a cannon, do you have a memorable performance you can share with us?
The first time did it professionally, flew up to Winnipeg by myself, joined the show there, did about 3 nights successfully. The 4th night, we're in the cannon. The routine was double cannon. I'd go up, go in. Roy, who I was doing it with, would go in and get in above me. And then they'd have the countdown. I would come shooting out halfway to the net. Roy would shoot out, pass over, and we would both hit the net. But this one time, they're in there. Wayne, you ready? I said, ready. Roy, you ready? Ready. MC does the countdown, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Sparks flying all around inside the barrel. And nothing happens.
Uh-oh.
So Papa goes back, opens up the back of the cannon behind us and says, I don't know what wrong. We try again. Boom. And we're trying to tell him, no, there's something wrong. Sparks are flying around in here. And then we're hearing the countdown again. 5, 4. Nothing happens. And Roy, who had done it for a number of years, was saying, now stay calm because it's armed. It could go off at any second. And we feel the cannon being lowered. And Papa's face in the barrel said, come out. And came out and were booed by about 12,000 people, which was the scariest thing I'd ever done.
Wow. So in a circus performance, Wayne, is the human cannonball one of the most dangerous acts, would you say, or are there others even more dangerous?
Well, any act can be dangerous. Part of being a good performer is finding the dangers and controlling them. So there are things that can happen in the cannon, but when certain mechanical, physical things are bound to happen the way they do, and as long as you keep cables out of your way, you're going to come out, go so far, and land in the net and be okay. So you just try to control the environment, control your body, and things usually work out.
Now, every night
things can go wrong. Things can go wrong on a simple ground act.
Yeah. How much physics was involved, or would you just jump in the cannon and be fired away? Or would they properly measure it out, the angle, the launch, the thrust?
Well, Papa Zucchini, Edmundo Zucchini, was an engineer in Italy. He designed and built the Zucchini cannons. And he would go in and he could kind of look at the building and estimate, where it was this and that. And if there was any doubt, we had a big bag of sand that we would load in and fire it. We called it the dummy, the real dummy. And we shoot it, and, that would check out the path, make sure everything was okay. So he would set it up, and he was always very accurate.
So tell us a little bit about Papa Zucchini.
Grew up in an Italian circus family, and I wished I'd have done things like this with him to get his stories, because he had a fantastic life, but it's pretty well lost to history, I guess. Even his son, Hugo, who we talked about it before, and neither one of us got it down with tape recorder or anything. But he was an all-around circus performer. He was literally born in the ring in Italy. He got the idea for the cannon from Jules Verne, and he was thinking of firing soldiers over enemy lines for World War I.
Wow.
So that's kind of his inspiration.
And how did you meet Papa Zucchini?
Well, it was my first Shrine Circus in Columbus, Ohio. Like I said, we'd made friends with the two guys doing the cannon and met him, and he was either enough impressed with our trampoline and balancing act or something that he called me to do it.
Now, I've seen on the internet there's actually a documentary about the Zucchini family. Are you familiar with that?
I think I pulled it up once.
Yeah, I thought he was rather remarkable in being a pioneer in the world of circus entertainment.
He was.
Now, Wayne, were your parents around when you were being shot out of a cannon? And if so, what did they say when you told them what you were doing?
Funny you should ask. My mother was kind of a jinx. When we were working in Las Vegas at Circus, I had one of my first injuries there. I was going quite a bit up higher than my wife, and then the upper 15 feet of my jump, the desert wind hit me, turned me over so that I came into the net landing standing up. And that's, I pitched forward and reversed the curve in my neck. And I've still got a x-ray that looks like my head's on backwards.
Ooh.
But like a week later, my mother came into Las Vegas. She'd never seen us do the cannon, so I wrapped a towel around my neck. I says, I can do it for support. Got shot out, and because of the towel, I couldn't really control my flight. So I literally came into the net almost the same way, but this time, instead of pitching forward so much, I straightened out a leg, and that's when I tore knee cartilage and required surgery.
Oh. How much traveling have you done as a circus performer?
Well, as a performer, traveled all 50 states, Mexico, all over Canada, Europe with the Harlem Globetrotters, South America with Circus. That's about it.
And do you have a favorite spot that you travel to?
a lot of them.
Now, today, Ringling Brothers obviously is no longer in business, but what's your opinion on the circus today?
Well, it's kind of shut down right now, too. Venues are closed. Performers are not working. It's kind of sad.
But even like Cirque du Soleil?
I personally didn't really like the direction it was going. I think their performances are outstanding. They have outstanding talent. But who are they? You know, most performers have some ego. That's why they're out there. And it was always a thing, you know, here are the great Wayne Zucchini or something. You know, people kind of knew you, they'd talk to you afterwards. Cirque du Soleil, you have no idea who those great people are.
Now, what name did you go under when you were being shot out of cannons?
Wayne Zucchini.
Okay.
Because it's supposed to be a family act, and they ran out of zucchinis.
Okay, because I didn't see that in my research. I didn't think that you were related to him.
No, I'm not.
Are there people out there being fired out of cannons today, or is that completely a lost art?
There are. I don't think they're working now because, again, their venues are all closed. But there were two families of cannon people.
So would this be anything that you had hoped your children would follow in? If, you know, circus performance life is usually a family tradition. Did any of your children have any interest in the circus?
We had one son that grew up in it, and he worked with us in all our acts except for the cannon. And we retired in 95. He continued on the road with his wife for a couple more years.
So, Wayne, and what have you been up to since retiring from performing since 1995?
Well, I coached the Gamify Circus, went back to school for about 10 years, and then we opened up a ballroom and teach people to ballroom dance.
Oh, really? Wow. And would you say that's related to what you've done as a performer, dancing and timing and movement?
Yep, exactly. And the teaching, you turning people on to dance is as much fun as getting those kids to do, you know, a triple back or something.
Right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today on the Route 66 podcast.
You bet.
All right. Have a good day, sir.
Bye.
Wow, what a show. Thank you, Maureen, Marcus, and Wayne. You know, you wouldn't believe how much work it takes to combine 3 guests into an hour-long show, especially after sifting through probably 3 hours worth of footage. But I have to say, I really enjoyed it, and I hope I was able to give you just a glimpse of the rich circus history along Route 66. Man, can you imagine having over 250,000 artifacts, especially on a teacher's salary? I know I drive my wife crazy with all my Route 66 stuff in the basement. Between the magazines, maps, books, stickers, t-shirts, I probably have maybe a few hundred items. Well, let's look at the trivia question. On the last episode, I spoke with Route 66 author Jim Hinckley from Kingman, Arizona. During my talk with Jim, he spoke about growing up in Michigan, where his grandfather had a patent for the coaster brake on the bicycle and his circle of acquaintances. When Jim was a little boy, there was a picture in his home of his grandfather with a famous pioneer who really made a mark here in America during the 20th century. Who was that pioneer? Henry Ford. That's right, the Henry Ford. And that probably explains Jim's second passion for automobiles and car mechanics, which he spoke a lot about on the last show, right after his lifelong passion for our beloved highway. Before I say goodbye, please remember to leave a voice message on our website about your favorite Route 66 restaurant at route66podcast.com. You'll see the link right there on the homepage for a SpeakPipe message, and maybe you will win a Route 66 face mask. Thank you for taking the journey with us here on the Route 66 podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Arno. Be well.